On today's PMEA's Take Note podcast, we are talking about the marching arts as it is the summer and the time when that all happens. But we're talking a little bit different perspective on it and about mindfulness in the marching arts on today's PMEA's Take Note podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of PMEA's Take Note podcast. I am Mark Despotakis, and it is July. Can you believe it? We are over halfway through the year now, and we are starting off the second half of the year, kind of like we did last year, talking about the marching arts. And I'm so excited today to be joined by Courtney Coffey. She is an actor, a model, and an empowerment coach, and she has a specific relationship to the marching arts. So Courtney, welcome in. Good to see you.
Good to see you. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
And we should note, she's joining us from the Los Angeles area, and she woke up early to be able to do this with. So we extra appreciate that.
Yeah, that's why the lighting's where the sun's coming out.
Hey, you know what? In Pennsylvania, we would love to see some LA sunrises. So enjoy it while you're there. So I would love for you to start to tell us a little bit about your story in the marching arts. So actually, let me back up and say this part first. I first discovered you, if you wish, not that I'm someone who's discovering people, but I came across you, I guess, about a year ago on the marching arts. The Marching Roundtable podcast with Tim Hinton, and Tim Hinton, past guest here on our podcast. And Tim did this great segment where he would pull pieces of Bands of America shows and ask folks to come in and do a little analysis of those. And so you were in there doing some analysis of talking color guard design. And I was like, okay, this person is awesome. She knows her stuff. I want to talk to her some more. So you were so gracious enough to be part of our Crescendo student conference just a couple of months ago. And now I'm so excited to talk a little bit more. So that part aside, tell us a little bit about your background in the marching arts and kind of how you started in high school and where you went with it.
Yeah, so my journey within the marching arts is kind of unique. I didn't start spinning until my junior year of high school. And I only started because my friend, her name was Lexi, my friend in my English class, she told me I should just audition because it would be fun. And I was like, yeah, why not? And so I showed up to the auditions and I was awful. Like I could not dance at all, could not spin. Like I kept hitting things. It was a train wreck, but somehow made the team and spun in high school for 2 years. And my high school was very like basic color guard. Like we knew how to do drop spins, like basics like that, but it was kind of like more military style. So we just kind of held the flag and like did cones or like did parade rests and all of that stuff. So it wasn't a ton of core style. And then I ended up going to college and spinning there. And I went to James Madison University, which is home of the Marching Royal Dukes, and spun with the Marching Royal Dukes for 4 years. Again, a miracle that I even made that team, but I did. And then from there, ended up as well joining Nuance Winter Guard, moving through the ranks there and going from almost being cut at freshman auditions for the Marching Royal Dukes to becoming captain my senior year of Nuance and the Marching Royal Dukes. So I marched there for 4 years at Nuance and the MRDs, and then marched Troopers Drum Corps in 2015, as well as marched Carolina Gold, which is a DCA Corps later on. And then once I moved to California, I marched over at Box Audium Winter Guard, which is an open class winter guard from San Diego, California. So it's been an interesting ride as a performer. And then after that, I, started designing for schools, taught a few open class drum corps here in Southern California, and continue to tech and teach while I'm here. So yeah.
So I want to note also, when you were at James Madison, you were in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, which is one of the awesome things in the marching world. So I'm curious, as you started that journey in kind of this very basic program, and you go to James Madison, which is certainly one of the finest marching bands in the country at the collegiate level. That must have been a pretty tough transition for you. And were there times when you were ready to say, this is not for me, this is too complicated, I don't want to be involved in this?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I remember specifically my freshman year. I cried after the audition because I was like, there's no way I'm ever spinning again because I got cut. Like there's no way that I made it. And by some miracle, I made the team. But then band camp was a lot. And I remember waking up at like 5 a.m. every day, going outside with one other girl, and we would like practice what we learned before because we just could not keep up. It was exhausting. It was awful. I didn't know the style there. Like it was a lot because I was learning new skills, new style of choreography, drill, and all of this stuff had to be on the field in less than a week. And each band camp day was like 12 hours or something. So it was a long day. And so I cried every day. I cried every day during the season 2, my first year. um, and I barely slept during that band camp. But the performances, I think, is the thing that kept me going that first year, and then ended up loving it from then on. So yeah, it was rough though.
Yeah, fascinating. And I think a lesson for folks out there that, like, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things in life that are going to take a lot of hard work, but look at the payoff at the end. I mean, I think
Yeah.
you've had a pretty incredible career in the marching arts, as well as other areas, which we're going to talk about. So we're going to come back to the marching arts in a bit and talk about maybe some of those lessons from your time there in the work that you're doing now. But so we talked about this college career, drum corps, um, mostly East Coast stuff.
Hmm.
So here you are now in LA. What's the story of how that happened?
Yeah. So other than color guard and marching arts and dance and all of that, I've always wanted to be an actor. I've always wanted to be in film in some way. So the degree that I was pursuing at James Madison was media arts and design, which is their version of a film degree. And so as soon as I graduated, I was like, I got to go to LA. Like, I don't know what else to do. I didn't know how I was going to get to LA because I had about $600 and like no way to get there other than my car. But I was determined to get there. So I spent the first semester after graduating with my parents at my parents' house and just decided, there's no point in waiting. If I wait, then I'm just not going to go. So I have to pick up everything and go. So I packed up and I put my car on a truck and I bought a plane ticket and I flew across the country. Granted, when I got there, like I had no job, I had no place to live. I knew no one. Like I had no family in California, no friends. And so I didn't know what I was going to do. But I figured it out because I knew I would. So I ended up getting my first job at Disneyland there and ended up getting an apartment close by, found some roommates, and made it work for the first 8 months. And then from there, got a job over at Walt Disney Studios and started producing in their studios and for their marketing teams over there. So it was a crazy, crazy ride getting here. But I do that. I like jump off cliffs and think that everything's going to work out all the time. I just like trust. So that could be a flaw of mine, but I think it's also like a strength of mine to just like go after what I want, even if it seems crazy.
So later we're going to put your website up, and from your website, folks can link to your Instagram, where I think they will see that yes, you do take those jumps and leaps literally sometimes,
Yeah.
and I think that's very cool. So still working then in the production space, acting space.
Yeah, so I've moved away from producing specifically, and now I'm working with the entertainment industry and corporate teams within the entertainment industry on mindfulness because it's something that I noticed is really missing there. And I have a background in psychology and mindfulness as well. And then also, like, yes, acting, still doing a little bit of directing and making things on the side, but mostly acting and helping corporate teams with their mindfulness and functioning day to day, especially within this weird pandemic environment.
Right, for sure. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the mindfulness later, and how that ties into our audience of in the music education space. So let's come back a little bit to the marching arts world. I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but as you know, we've just entered a DCI season. We're coming out of a strange time for the marching arts. I mean, for the world, obviously, but for bands, for drum corps. It's kind of strange, DCI celebrating their 50th anniversary season after having this very odd season last year, non-competitive, back to competing. And I don't know if you've seen any shows, but I've seen a few online, and it's like nothing stopped. And I would almost argue that they're starting off better than they have in previous years. It's pretty incredible. But as you look at color guard and the marching arts in general, what's your takeaway? What are you seeing? Are there any trends? Anything that you're currently seeing in the activity?
Yeah, I'd say externally, like just watching shows and seeing everything that's going on. I'll definitely say that there's a trend towards harder skills at lower levels. So, specifically speaking to like A class within WGI, but also like open class within DCI as compared to world class. Like these skills that used to be reserved for those world class groups are now being seen at the A and open levels. So, that's very interesting. So, harder skills at lower levels because everyone's trying to up their game. Um, this year groups are really, really pushing for it though. I think everyone's like starved of color guard. And so when it comes to performance and achievement, but also design, like everyone is just pushing the envelope. And so you really have to take that extra step in order to be competitive at the very base level this year, which is super interesting. And I will say within DCI and DCA, there's this huge trend, and it's been going for a while, but now you can tell it's not going anywhere. That there's this huge trend towards the music ensemble being a part of the visual ensemble. So the music ensemble has to, know what they're doing with their feet, and they have to know how to dance at some level, and they have to know how to use their bodies to integrate the story and the music together to help the color guard share that story visually as well. So there's no way really to continue to have that separation of the music ensemble and the visual ensemble anymore. Like everything is working together. So it's a really cool trend to see moving forward.
And I think that's even, we're seeing that in the band world too. Certainly not as much in DCI, but I've seen some Bands of America groups, at that high level, that are asking the band proper to do so many more things, particularly visually, than in the past. I'm just curious, have you seen Carolina Crown at all this year?
Yeah, I have.
I mean, I want to see this person live just so I can download the app and participate in the show.
Yeah.
Because I want to see how that evolves. And to me, that's a really interesting new area. I think performing groups have always tried to find a way to engage the audience, maybe by, the drum major turns around and claps or something, and to get the audience to clap along. But this is a whole new way of doing it, where there's QR codes on the drum major podium saying, go download this app, and be part of the show. It is amazing how the activity continues to evolve, as we kind of went through this theatrical stage of, as opposed to a traditional marching band theatrical. Now, I think this is kind of the next step, right?
Yeah.
It's the audience being more involved in the show.
For sure. I see a lot more tech being used in shows, a lot more video being used in shows. And as we move more into the VR world, because the whole world is starting to move into the VR world, we're going to be seeing more of that. So versus the audience and the ensemble being separated, it's going to be more of like a union where you can put on those goggles and almost see yourself on the field with them and walking through the show the way that they want to tell the story. So I'm seeing that come up very quickly, which is interesting, but it's going to change the landscape forever. So yeah.
And one of the things with that is you live by the technology, you die by the technology. So that is still kind of a I don't know if I'm going to say dangerous, but it's that can be nerve-wracking for staffs. I think that's a big risk in a lot of ways. So I was going to ask you for predictions for the future, but I think you've kind of put that out there. Any other predictions for what you see in the marching arts?
Yeah, I kind of see, of course, at the very basic level, color guards and marching arts in general are going to be more online. Like, I feel like it's going to be, I don't want to say the word mainstream, but definitely more visible online. So people are going to have to be posting on social media and have to be sharing content in that way. The VR thing is going to be huge as soon as someone decides to like try to take that leap. But it's definitely going to be huge in WGI and DCI and DC and all of them. And, I see some more creativity with the way instruments, particularly in the pit, are used. I think that there's just going to be more experimentation with the type of instruments that are going to be allowed on the field. So I'm interested to see how that plays out as well.
Go back a few years ago when George Hopkins from the Cadets was pushing this idea of saxophones on the field, and nothing came of it. But you've certainly seen the instrumentation evolve in what happens, in the musical part of the drum corps. So what I really appreciate about your perspective is, and I was lucky enough to actually be out in the LA area about a month or so ago. And so we were able to sit down and talk a lot more about this. I've been in the marching band world forever. And there's in many ways been this separation of here's the music, here's the band, and then here's the color guard. And the smart folks were able to design appropriately to integrate that. But even when that happened, I think a lot of the music folks and hey, I'll take some ownership of this too, didn't always pay attention to the color guard and the value of that. And I appreciate the perspective that you bring of realizing and understanding, hey, you can say I'm a color guard person, but you also are able to realize the value of how does this all play in together. And I think that's something that a lot of, I'll say it, band directors don't. Hey, the color guard's here, do your thing, go into the show where you need to be. So you bring that, I think, a really valuable perspective from that in that area.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it comes from my background of being a storyteller in film, but also like having a huge knowledge now of the marching arts. Is just like, you have to understand how everything works together for it to do what you want it to do in order to convey your message to the audience. Because the thing is, even though you might be hyper fixated on something, like, of course, I watch the flags and the rifles and the sabers all the time when I go watch a marching show, but I try to pay attention to the music ensemble as well and what they're doing. Because when you're creating a story, when you're creating this world within the marching arts, there's different people are going to pay attention to different things, but you don't want any person in the audience to miss the story or the overall message. So you have to pay attention to what everyone's doing and how everything's working together in order to accurately portray that. And that's really how you get from, the very basic level of being like, this is a good show, to becoming a great show and really like hitting and affecting the audience in that way. So yeah, everything works together and you have to pay attention to that.
Good and important takeaway there for the band directors out there. It's about, if you're going to put a product on the field, it's about telling that whole story. So use all of the elements you have to tell the story. Okay, so let's move back. I'm jumping around a lot, but you talked a little bit earlier about mindfulness as that plays into your work in film and television. But also as maybe that plays into in the marching arts. So talk about what mindfulness is, if you could define that maybe.
Yeah. So mindfulness is kind of like becoming aware of your mental and emotional state and focusing on that awareness in the present moment, while kind of acknowledging everything else that's going on. So acknowledging your feelings, acknowledging and accepting your feelings, your thoughts, everything that's going on with your body, really paying attention to that mind-body connection.
So I've watched a lot of your YouTube videos where talk about you talk about mindfulness, but also you talk about how do you do those things. And
Mhm.
I think people might hear this and say, okay, that's this pie in the sky thing, and that's not a practical thing, and how can I really do that? I think one of your goals is to try to convince people otherwise of that.
Yeah.
And how do
Yeah.
you do that?
It's a lot more connected to us and like grounded in our reality than we think. So specifically within the marching arts, we're seeing a lot of change, and with that change comes uneasiness, and people are scared, and there's a lot of trying to hold on to the way that things were. From the staff point of view, we're seeing a lot of resistance to change, and from the students' point of view, a lot of students like want to push the envelope. They want to try new things, but they're not being received at the same level that they should be. And so, especially coming out of this pandemic, right? Like everyone is dealing with a lot of things emotionally. You can't expect students or staff to perform at this extremely high level that you need them to without paying attention or acknowledging everything else that's going on in the world. Because there's a lot going on in the world. And these people, whether they're on the staff or they're performers, are humans first. And so the best way to, portray the human experience through your stories is to get in touch with your humanity, and doing that through mindfulness, whether it's meditation, whether it's uh, journaling, whatever it is for you, is going to help you connect that story better. Something that I see in particular and that I've seen with groups that I've taught is during the pandemic, I saw a lot of like my students becoming almost indifferent to something that they loved. Like I've known these kids forever, and they love spinning, they love dancing, they love performing. And so during the pandemic, when we would have rehearsals, when we were allowed to, of course, or even do it over Zoom, a lot of them just had this hopelessness and this lack of motivation. And so as an instructor, of course, I don't want to see that. I want them to be okay. But also, like, from a design and educator's point of view, like, we have to get things back up to where they were at least. And so the way that I did that, and I found helped a lot, was putting my students and their emotions first. So before we'd even start doing anything with technique, we'd do something I like to call mindful movement, but it's a way to connect that mind-body connection to movement. And not only does that help with mindfulness and dealing with those emotions and letting it out through the body, but it also helps elevate their expressiveness. It helps elevate their passion and helps free up their artistry so they're able to more accurately and more gracefully portray the story. And so mindful movement is something that's helped with a lot of my students, and not just, the color guard, but also musical ensembles as well. But also, just being humans with them, and talking about things if they need to talk about it, or taking a day to just like sit and relax and absorb what's going on. Because as a child or as a young performer, it's really, really hard to deal with this. I mean, it's hard to deal with this as an adult too, but like there's a lot going on that it's just really hard to understand, and you can't ignore that, especially as artists, because our job as artists is to really be connected. And so if you let your students and your staff ignore that, that's almost hurting you in a way. So bringing that mindfulness in now is really key.
So one of the trends, the trendy topics in education right now is SEL, social emotional learning, and I think you could argue that that's already been happening in music and arts classrooms for
Mhm.
decades without a name put on it. Just to your point, by the nature of what we do in the arts. But I think this is really what you're suggesting is a really good way to actually do that very intentionally. That a band director or a color guard director can very intentionally do this type of work with their students and see a tangible outcome from it
Right.
just by taking the time to, you know step back for a second and think through things. I mean, is that a fair takeaway?
Absolutely. Yeah. Learning how to help your students deal with those emotions, learning how to help your students deal with that fear. There's a lot of fear going around. And actually, like putting it into something that they can actively do and make time to do during rehearsal not only shows them that, you care about them beyond their achievement because they're more than their achievement, but it also helps them with their artistry and will help the show overall, not just this year, but in the coming years and help them grow as performers, which as educators is ultimately what we want, right? Like we want them to grow and expand within the activity. So it helps a ton with that.
As I look back on my time, when I performed, I don't remember, did I hit that set every show?
Right.
What I remember is the experiences of the rehearsal and the camaraderie and the performances and just being around friends in that large group. And so I think it's important, as you're doing, to remind staffs that that stuff's important. You want them to hit their sets and you want them to hit the right dots, but they're getting such a larger experience out of this that it's important to make sure to do the things that you're saying here to do, and to be mindful. And it's important for the staff to take on that mindfulness thinking too.
Right, it really is. And I'm seeing, because traditionally, especially within the DCI community, traditionally we've seen some fear-based education tactics. And as a performer, like I was fed these tactics as well. And I think although they were damaging at the time, but they were seen as something that really helped. And so as we're moving forward, we're seeing people hold on to those tactics, but people are just really getting fed up, and you can see it's like breaking down the students, and not only training your students in mindfulness, but training your staff in mindfulness, and helping the students that way is going to help a lot, because doing these fear-based education tactics is extremely harmful, but it's also just not going to help them or want them to grow and continue in the activity. I know specifically, I almost quit one time because instructors did that to me, where they were, personally attacking me and just like not being very based in like the skill. They would correct me based on like things that were outside of my control, basically. And I see that happening now too with other instructors. And it's just not something that needs to continue with the activity, because it's harmful to the staff, to the show, and to the students. So bringing mindfulness tactics in for everyone can help a ton with that, because that's one trend that needs to stop.
In some programs, highly competitive, or even the not really highly competitive ones, to your point, there are staff who lead from that perspective.
Right.
And so have you found yourself, I guess, in a situation where you are with fellow staff members who are like that? And if so, how would you handle that? Because I think that might be a reality, that there are folks who want to take the path that you are, but they're working with colleagues who don't think that way.
Right. I've been fortunate enough to work with staff who's all been very kind and trained in psychology and the ways to deal with students that way. So I personally, as an instructor, have never had to do that from that side of things. But I can tell you, as a bystander, as an educator, it's our jobs to be allies and there for our students, right? And so I know it can be hard, especially if you're like the tech and the caption head is doing that to the students. But I think the first thing that you should do is, of course, go talk to them aside, because you do have power and you don't want to undermine their authority in front of the students, of course. But if it continues and escalates, then you need to take it to, the admin staff and see what you can do from there, because it's ultimately very dangerous. And while it is a risk to do that, it's not about us, it's about the students, right? At the end of the day, it's about the students. So we want to make sure that we make that as safe of a place as possible.
You do training for programs
Mhm.
around this idea of mindfulness, specifically to the marching arts. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I do workshops, of course, based around fear, based around dealing with these emotions. But the most popular thing that I do for the marching arts is something called mindful movement, which I touched on a little bit earlier, which is a movement based workshop that really focuses on that mind body connection. So a lot of times, we think with our heads. Of course, and everything is up here. And so we see a lot of disconnect between the ideas that we want to express and what our body's doing. And we see that in the real world too. Like that's something that I work with corporate teams on as well. But in reality, to fully like move through our energy, move through our emotions, we have to make that connection because everything within our body is connected. And so, using that visualization and that meditation in conjunction with movement, because moving that energy will help you express things more, uh, really helps you get out things that you need to get out, really helps you absorb things that you need to absorb, and really helps you learn. Specifically within groups at a more tangible level, helps groups learn more ways to use their body, more creative ways to use their bodies and their emotions to portray a story. It's kind of another approach to a visual acting class for these pageantry performers. So it helps them do that. And as a byproduct, also helps them deal with their own emotions and helps them work through some things that they need to work through personally. So it's cool that it kind of tackles things from both of those ways because it makes you a better human, but it also makes you a better performer, which is really, really cool. So I love doing that.
And you offer this virtually, right?
I do offer it virtually. I love doing it in person, but a lot of the sessions I do are virtual. So that's a little bit of a lower cost, more accessible way to do these workshops.
So if people want to find out about that in your work, where do they go?
Yeah, so if you want to find out more, I have a website. It's called simplycolorguard.com. It's focused on providing resources and also increasing transparency within the marching arts. So you can head over there and contact me through that. Or, like you mentioned earlier, I have social media. So I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all of those. And those are all linked to the website. So you can find me there.
One comment on Simply Color Guard, and we talked a little bit about this when we were having lunch a while ago, is I really appreciate that you have a glossary on there. And you explained the reason for that. Can you just
Yeah.
explain that briefly?
Yeah, so when we get further down in our careers, a lot of things seem like innate. They seem natural, like common sense almost. But we speak a totally different language. Like we are not speaking English within the marching arts. We speak a totally different language. So when it comes to people who are first coming into the activity, when you say things like, "Oh, we need to wrap that. We need to clean that," like they're not going to understand what that means. They're going to go grab a mop and be like, "Clean what?" you know? um, so that's not the way it works. So, like I said, Simply Color Guard is really for making the marching arts more accessible. And one way to do that is being more transparent with our language and helping people understand that language. And so I created a glossary of terms that we use within the marching arts to help them be like, oh, that's what that means. That's how I do what they're asking me to do, because sometimes also we forget, because we're so used to the way that we speak in this activity, that there's a disconnect with newer students. And so it'll help them also, receive what we're trying to tell them and get better faster that way. So, yeah.
Well, it's a tremendous resource, and I know you have this goal of growing that website further as well.
Mhm.
So I would really encourage folks to go take a look and reach out to Courtney. I mean, I think I've learned a lot and thought a lot just from the few conversations I've had with her. So I can't even imagine what you would get from something like this mindful movement work. So Courtney, thank you for taking some time to talk with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been fun.
And we may check back in with you as the DCI season ends, as the BOA season begins, to talk a little bit about what's going on in the trenches there. So thanks again for talking to us.
Yeah, thank you. Looking forward to that.
And thank you all for joining us on today's PMEA's Take Note podcast. We will see you next time.